and I don't think that that system should be used against people who are acutely vulnerable. I don't think it will work. I don't think it will keep them. It won't make them pay their bills. It won't keep them warm. So there's a lot. It's difficult, and it's difficult for the energy suppliers. It really is. But it is about using a judgment, and it's the wrong answer to force prepayment meters upon people who are acutely vulnerable, because you're right, they won't be forcibly disconnected, but the effect, if you can't top up your prepayment meter, is the same. The electricity stops flowing. Your report is absolutely shocking. It's absolutely not how energy companies are expected to behave towards customers, particularly customers in vulnerable circumstances. I do want to be clear, though, that prepayment meters are not in themselves a bad thing. They're just like a pay-as-you-go phone contract. It can be a good option. Some people prefer to manage their bills this way. It gives you a lot of control. But what the report uncovers is the forced entry to fit these meters. Now, that is something that is provided for in the law. A court has to sign off on it, but it's supposed to be an absolute last resort, really to be used for people who persistently refuse to pay their bills and who won't engage with their energy supplier or talk to a debt advisor to help manage their debt. So it's really, really kind of last resort stuff, and it should never be used for people in acutely vulnerable situations.
And we learned that you need a court order to do it, but the Times also reports that the judge making that decision, the magistrate, can typically see between 100 and 1,000 warrants applied for in a 15-minute period. So the level of scrutiny on who is vulnerable and who's not vulnerable seems to be very slack.
No, I think that's right, and I think that's really on the energy companies to assess that. They're supposed to know who their customers are, and particularly which customers are in vulnerable situations. I mean, the energy companies will say that there is a kind of hardcore of customers who refuse to pay their bills, and it's for that situation that warrants exist as a last resort. But I think what we're seeing this winter is very many more people struggling with their bills, even with the government support. Bills are double what they were. And I think there's all the more reason that we should expect energy companies to help customers through this and help them find a way to manage an affordable payment plan.
There is a point here, though, isn't there? We have to be careful, because a couple of people have made this point to us. There is a distinction somewhere along the line between a vulnerable person and someone who's just not paying. Someone who thinks, I don't feel I need to pay energy, maybe for political reasons, maybe because they're bad at budgeting. And actually, they're never going to be cut off. That doesn't seem to exist as a possibility. And therefore, companies have to do something at some stage, don't they? That there has to be a moment where they say, well, if you're going to have the energy, you're going to have to prepay it in advance because we can't trust you to pay for it after the event. And there has to be a system that allows that to happen, or maybe there doesn't. What do you think?
I mean, I think there probably does have to be that system, but I don't think it needs to be widely used. I think all other channels should be exhausted first, and I don't think that system should be used against people who are acutely vulnerable. I don't think it will work. I don't think it will keep them. It won't make them pay their bills. It won't keep them warm. So there's a lot. It's difficult, and it's difficult for the energy suppliers. It really is. But it is about using a judgment, and it's the wrong answer to force prepayment meters upon people who are acutely vulnerable, because you're right, they won't be forcibly disconnected, but the effect, if you can't top up your prepayment meter, is the same. The electricity stops flowing.
Yeah, and these people are known to be vulnerable as well. That's the other point, that the Times found out, because you could see the job notes, and it says things like a woman in her 50s with severe mental health bipolar, a woman who suffers with mobility problems and is partially sighted, a mum whose daughter is disabled and has a hoist and an electric wheelchair. So there is knowledge that these people have problems.
That's right, and there's got to be a combination of the energy suppliers knowing who their customers are, trying very, very hard to avoid that situation, and then there's got to also be some judgment from the people who are on the site, because sometimes you don't know what you're going to find until you turn up. So it is not straightforward, but nonetheless, the outcomes in your report are absolutely shocking.
British Gas say this is not who we are, it's not how we do business. Can we believe that? Because it does seem to be, I mean, they don't get their hands dirty themselves, they hand it off to someone else who does it. Do you think this is how British Gas does business, and indeed other big energy companies do business?
yeah, I can't speak for British Gas. They'll have to give their own response to this, and I'm sure Ofgem will investigate thoroughly and get a good sense of whether this is a sort of very atypical aberration or whether this is a sign of a deeper problem. But I think it's absolutely right to look at it properly.
Yeah, and it wouldn't surprise you if this was a bigger problem. It doesn't seem that there seem to be lots of examples that the Times uncovered in one area.
I mean, it's yeah, like I say, it makes for a very uncomfortable read.
Yeah, it does. Does it matter that these companies, Centrica, I think the first half of 2022 made £1 billion profit? There is a concern generally, isn't there, about the cost of energy, the cost of living, the levels of profits made by these big businesses. Do we have to be careful that, I mean, businesses make money, that's what businesses do. Lots of pensions will be invested in some of these businesses, and therefore their wealth is important to the functioning of the economy. Or is there concern that in your time in this industry, do you think, Mary, that there is a concern that the difference between the pain suffered by customers and the profits still earned by the businesses are so far removed on either side of the scale?
It's a really complicated question, actually, because some energy companies aren't making very much money at all. In fact, they're probably losing money in the current circumstances, and those are sort of pure supply companies who don't have any energy generation assets, so they're not benefiting from the high production prices. Centrica, of course, does have production and is benefiting from those prices. So different companies are in very, very different circumstances, and it's quite hard to generalize.
That's interesting. Just before you go, a couple of asked the question I don't know the answer to, and you probably will do. Why are prepay energy bills, why are these prepayment meters more expensive? Because that's the tragic irony in this story, isn't it? That people have no money, they get their door kicked in, something installed, and they end up with actually a more expensive way of paying than through a direct debit. Why is that, Mary?
So it's historically because all the sort of payment infrastructure needed around top-ups was more expensive to run. That's changing with smart meters. So actually, smart prepay meters are no more expensive to run than conventional meters, and some companies are offering pretty good smart prepay tariffs.
So is that a solution to this, that companies could be compelled only to install smart prepay meters rather than prepay meters that carry this additional tariff?
Where they will work. So smart meters are they now work in most properties, but not absolutely every property. So,
and is there a way that they could install a prepaid meter that wasn't more expensive than direct debit? Is that possible, and the company eats the cost?
that is a good question. I mean, I think it would be possible for the company to the companies can set their own tariffs. What Ofgem does is cap the maximum. So it's capped the maximum prepay above the maximum for direct debit, but there's no reason a company couldn't choose under its own policy to set that tariff differently.
No, potentially if they're making a lot of money and they've had this practice exposed to them, maybe that's the thing they might think about.